Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Sleepy Archive. I'm so glad you're here. How was your day today? Tonight, we step into a world of candlelight and oak tables, of linen napkins and silver spoons, of bread trenchers and spiced wine. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 1500s, and in the great halls and quiet kitchens of England, life revolves around one thing above all else: the meal. Not the fast, distracted eating of our modern world, but slow, ceremonial, deeply ritualized feasting, where every cup was filled in a certain order, every dish carried in a certain way, every gesture at the table, every bow, every word had a meaning. A man named John Russell, usher to a great lord, sat down and wrote it all out. Every rule, every custom, every small courtesy of the medieval English table. And tonight, we read his words slowly, so settle in. Let the smell of wood smoke and roasting herbs drift through your mind. Let the sound of a great hall at supper, the clink of cups, the murmur of quiet conversation, the crackle of the fire, wrap around you like a warm cloak, and let the ancient rhythms of the English table carry you gently to sleep. Chapter 1. The Great Hall, Setting the Table. The natural Maester Aristotle saith that everybody be the course of nature is inclined to hear and esse all that refresheth, and quickeneth the spreeties of man 1/werfer. I ha thus in this book following too, gathered together divers treatises touching the manners and meals of Englishmen in former days, and have added thirdo divers figures of men of old, at meat and in bed, 3 to the end that, to my fellows here and to come, the home life of their forefathers may be somewhat more plain, in their own minds, somewhat rejoiced. The treatises here collected consist of a main one, John Russell's Book of Nurture, to which I have written a separate preface for, extracts and short books illustrating Russell, like the Book of Demeanor and Book of Courtesy, and certain shorter poems addressed partly to those whom Cot Grave calls infans de famille, yonkers of account, youths of good houses, children of rich parents, yet ailey, partly to carvers and servants, partly to schoolboys, partly to people in general, or at least those of them who were willing to take advice as to how they should mend their manners and live a healthy life. The belle babes and sweet children may be likened to the young gentlemen, hinksmen, 6 enfants, or more, as it shall please the kinge, at Edward the Fourth's court. And the authors or translators of the books in this volume, somewhat to that sovereign's maester of hinksmen, whose duty it was to shew the schools 5 of urbanity and nurture of England, to learn them to ride cleanly and surely, to draw them also to justs, to learn them where they're barneys, to haul courtesy in wards, deedies, and degrees, diligently to keep them in rules of goinges and sittings, after they be of honor. Moreover, to teach them sundry languages, and other learninges virtuous, to harping, to pipe, sing, dance, and with other honest and temperate behavior and patience, and to keep daily and wakely with these children due convenity, with corrections in their chambers, according to such gentlemen, and each of them to be used to that thinge of virtue that he shall be most apt to learn, with remembrance daily of God's service accustomed. This maester sitteth in the halley, next unto these hinksmen, at the same board, to have his respect unto their demeanages, how mannerly they eat and drink, and to their communication and other forms curial, after the book of urbanity. Liber Niger and Household Ordinances, p. 45. That these young hinksmen were gentlemen, is expressly stated. 6, and they had every che of them an honest servant to keep their chamber and harneys, and to hym in this court whiles their maesters he present in court. I suppose that when they grew up, some became esquires, and then their teaching would prove of use, for these esquires of household of old were accustomed, winter and summer, in afternoons and in evenings, to draw to lord's chambers within court, there to keep honest company after their cunnage, in talking of chronicles of kings and of other policies, or in piping or harping, singing, or other acts martial less, to help occupy the court, and accompany strongers, tyll the time require of departing. But that a higher station than an esquires was in store for some of these henchmen may be known from the history of one of them. Thomas Howard, eldest son of Sir John Howard, knight, who was afterwards Duke of Norfolk and killed at Bosworth Field, was among these henchmen or pages, enfants 6 or more, of Edward IV. He was made Duke of Norfolk for his splendid victory over the Scots at Flodden, and in Bullen and Catherine Howard were his granddaughters. Among the other learnages virtuous taught him at Edward's court was no doubt that of drawing, for we find that he was buried with much pomp at Thetford Abbey under a tomb designed by himself and Master Clark, master of the works at King's College, Cambridge, and Wassel a Freemason of Bury S. Edmonds, Cooper's ADH, Cant I. P. 29 Call. 2. The question of the social rank of these ballet babes 6a, children, and pueri who stood at tables, opens up the whole subject of upper-class education in early times in England. It is a subject that, so far as I can find, has never yet been separately treated 7, and I therefore throw together such few notices as the kindness of friends 8 and my own chance grubbings have collected. These is a sort of stopgap till the appearance of Mr. Anstey's volume on early Oxford studies in the Chronicles and Memorials, a volume which will, I trust, give us a complete account of early education in our land. If it should not, I hope that Mr. Quick will carry his pedagogic researches past Henry VIII's time, or that one of our own members will take the subject up. It is worthy of being thoroughly worked out. For convenience sake, the notices I have mentioned are arranged under 6 heads. One consideration should be premised, that manly exercises, manners and courtesy, music and singing, knowledge of the order of precedency of ranks, and ability to carve, were in early times more important than Latin and philosophy. Aylmar, E.K.Y.N.G. gives these directions to Athelbris, his steward, as to Horne's education. Which of these accomplishments would Cambridge or Oxford teach? Music alone. 10a that, as Harrison says, was one of the quadrivials, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. The trivium was grammar, rhetoric, and logic. 1. The chief places of education for the sons of our nobility and gentry were the houses of other nobles, and specially those of the chancellors of our kings, men not only able to read and write, talk Latin and French themselves, but in whose hands the court patronage lay. As early as Henry II's time, a.d. 1154 to 62, if not before 11, this system prevailed. A friend notes that Fitzstephen says of Becket, the nobles of the realm of England and of neighboring kingdoms used to send their sons to serve the chancellor, whom he trained with honorable bringing up and learning, and when they had received the knight's belt, sent them back with honor to their fathers and kindred. Some he used to keep. The king himself, his master, entrusted to him his son, the heir of the realm, to be brought up, whom he had with him, with many sons of nobles of the same age, and their proper retinue and masters and proper servants in the honor due. Vita S. Tome pp. 189, 190 ed. Giles, Roger de Hoveden, a Yorkshireman, who was a clerk or secretary to Henry II, says of Richard the Lionheart's unpopular chancellor, Longchamps the bishop of Ely. All the sons of the nobles acted as his servants, with downcast looks, nor dared they to look upward towards the heavens unless it so happened that they were addressing him. And if they attended to anything else, they were pricked with a goad, which their lord held in his hand, fully mindful of his grandfather of pious memory, who, being of servile condition in the district of Beauvais, had for his occupation to guide the plough and whip up the oxen, and who at length, to gain his liberty, fled to the Norman territory. Riley's Hoveding, too. 232, quoted in the Cornhill magazine, Vol 15, p. 165, 12. All chancellors were not brutes of this kind, but we must remember that young people were subjected to rough treatment in early days. Even so late as Henry VI's time, Agnes Potton sends to London on the 28th of January, 1457, to pray the master of her son of 15, that if the boy hath not done well, nor will not amend, his master Greenfield will truly bellash him till he will amend. And of the same lady's treatment of her marriageable daughter, Elizabeth, Clear writes on the 29th of June, 1454, she, the daughter, was never in so great sorrow as she is nowadays, for she may not speak with no man, whosoever come, and he not may seen or speak with my man, nor with servants of her mother's, but that she beareth her on hand otherwise than she meaneth, and she hath since east of the most part been beaten once in the week or twice, and sometimes twice on a day, and her head broken in 2 or 3 places. V. I. P. 50 call. 1 ed. 1840. The treatment of Lady Jane Grey by her parents was also very severe, as she told Ascham, though she took it meekly, as her sweet nature was. One of the greatest benefits that God ever gave me is that he sent me so sharp and severe parentes, and so gentle a schoolmaster. For when I am in presence either of father or mother, whether I speak, keep silence, sit, stand, or go eat, drink, be merry or sad, be sewing, playing, dancing, or doing anything else, I must do it as it were in sock weight, measure, and number, even so perfectly as God made the world, or else I am so sharp lie taunted, so cruel lie threatened, yet present lie sometimes with pinches, nippies, and bobs, and other ways which I will not name for the honor I bear them, so without measure, misordered, that I think myself in hell till time come that I must go to him. Elmer, who teacheth me so gently, so pleasant lie, with sock fair allurements to learning, that I think all the time nothing whiles I am with him. And when I am called from him, I fall on weeping. The schoolmaster, Ed. Mayor. The inordinate beating 13 of boys by schoolmasters, whom he calls in different places sharp, fond, and lewd 14. Ascham denounces strongly in the first book of his schoolmaster, and he contrasts their folly in beating into their scholars the hatred of learning with the practice of the wise writers who by gentle allurements breed them up in the love of writing. Indeed, the origin of his book was Sir W.M. Cecil's saying to him, I have strange news brought me this morning, that divers scholars of Eton be run away from the school for fear of beating. Sir Peter Carew, says Mr. Froude, being rather a troublesome boy, was chained in a Hackham dog kennel till he ran away from it. But to return to the training of young men in nobles' houses, I take the following from Fidz's appendix to his Life of Wolsey, John de Athon, upon the constitutions of Audubon, tit. 23. In respect to the goods of such who died intestate, and upon the word baroness, has the following passage concerning Grodstad Bishop of Lincoln 15, who died October 9th, 1253. Robert, surnamed Grodstad of holy memory, late Bishop of Lincoln, when King Henry asked him, as if in wonder, where he learnt the nurture in which he had instructed the sons of nobles and peers of the realm, whom he kept about him as pages, Damicellos 16, since he was not descended from a noble lineage, but from humble parents, is said to have answered fearlessly in the house or guest chambers of greater kings than the King of England, because he had learnt from understanding the Scriptures the manner of life of David, Solomon, and other kings. 15. Rayner, in his Apostle, Benade, from Saunders acquaints us that the sons of the nobility were placed with Whiting Abbot of Glastonbury for their education, who was contemporary with the cardinal, and which method of education was continued for some time afterward. There is in the custody of the present Earl of Stafford, a nobleman of the greatest humanity and goodness, an original of instructions by the Earl of Arundel, written in the year 1620, for the benefit of his younger son, the Earl of Stafford's grandfather, under this title. In these instructions is the following paragraph: "You shall in all things reverence, honor, and obey my Lord Bishop of Norwich, as you would do any of your parents, esteeming of whatsoever he shall tell or command you, as if your grandmother of Arundel, your mother, or myself should say it. And in all things esteem yourself as my lord's page, a breeding which yous of my house far superior to you were accustomed unto, as my grandfather of Norfolk, and his brother my good uncle of Northampton were both bred as pages with bishops, and c. Sir Thomas More, who was born in 1480, was brought up in the house of Cardinal Morton. Roper says that he was received into the house of the right reverend, wise, and learned prelate Cardinal Morton, where, though he was young of years, yet would he at Christmastide suddenly sometimes step in among the players, and never studying for the matter, make a part of his own there presently among them, which made the lookers on more sport than all the players beside, in whose wit and towardness the cardinal much delighting would say of him unto the nobles that divers times dined with him, This child here waiting at the table, whosoever shall live to see it, will prove a marvelous man. Whereupon, for his better furtherance in learning, he placed him at Oxford, and c. Roper's Life of More, ed. Singer, 1822, p. 3. Cressiker More in his Life of More, ed. 1828, p. 17, states the same thing more fully, and gives the remark of the cardinal more accurately, thus, that boy there waiting on him, whoever should live to see it, would prove a marvelous rare man. 17. Through Wolsey's household, says Professor Brewer, almost all the officials of Henry VIII's time past. Cavendish, in his Life of Wolsey, p. 38, ed. Singer, 1825, says of the cardinal, and at meals there was continually in his chamber a board kept for his chamberlains, and gentlemen ushers, having with them a mess of the young lords, and another for gentlemen. Among these young lords, we learn at p. 57 was my Lord Percy, the son and heir of the Earl of Northumberland, who then attended upon the Lord Cardinal, and was also his servitor. And when it chanced the Lord Cardinal at any time to repair to the court, the Lord Percy would then resort for his pastime unto the Queen's chamber, and there would fall in dalliance among the Queen's maidens, being at the last more conversant with mistress and bullion than with any other, so that there grew such a secret love between them that, at length they were insured together, intending to marry 18. Among the persons daily attendant upon Wolsey in his house, downlying and uprising, Cavendish enumerates of lords 9 or 10, who had each of them allowed 2 servants, and the Earl of Derby had allowed 5 men. 36-7. On this Singer prints a note, which looks like a guess, sign grow. Those lords that were placed in the great and privy chambers were wards, and as such paid for their board and education. It will be seen below that he had a particular officer called instructor of his wards, Cavendish. 38 L. 2. Why I suppose the note to be a guess is because at p. 33 Cavendish has stated that Wolsey had also a great number daily attending upon him, both of noblemen and worthy gentlemen, of great estimation and possessions, with no small number of the tallest yeomen that he could get in all his realm, insomuch that well was that noblemen and gentlemen that might prefer any tall and comely yeoman unto his service. In the household of the Earl of Northumberland in 1511 were young gentlemen at their frines finding 19 in my lord's house for the whole year, and hondsmen and a young gentleman at their frines finding vija, as to say, henchmen ij, and young gentlemen ij. 254, no doubt for the purpose of learning manners, and c. And that such youths would be found in the house of every noble of importance, I believe, for as Walter Mapes, of 1160 to 90 A.D., says of the great nobles, in his poem De Diversis, or Dinibus Hominum, the example of manners goes out from their houses, exemplar morum domibus procedit eram. That these houses were in some instances only the finishing schools for our well-born young men, after previous teaching at home, and at college as possible, though the cases of Sir Thomas More and Ascombe are exactly the other way. But the Lord Percy last named had a schoolmaster in his house, the Maester of Grammar J. P. 254, liveries for the Maester of Grammar 20 in household. Item half a loof of household braid, a pottle of beer, and 2 white lyghts p. 97. Every schoolmaster touching grammar in the house, cs. p. 47, 51. Edward IV. As Hanksmen were taught grammar. And if the Potuns are to be taken as a type of their class, our nobles and gentry at the end of the 15th century must have been able to read and write freely. Chaucer's squire could write, and though the custom of sealing deeds and not signing them prevailed, more or less, till Henry VIII's time, it is doubtful whether this implied inability of the sealers to write. Mr. Chappell says that in Henry VIII's time half our nobility were then writing ballads. Still, the bad spelling and grammar of most of the letters up to that period, and the general ignorance of our upper classes were, says Professor Brewer, the reason why the whole government of the country was in the hands of ecclesiastics. Even in Henry VIII's time, Sir Thomas Bullen is said to have been the only noble at court who could speak French with any degree of fluency, and so was learned enough to be sent on an embassy abroad. But this may be questioned. Yet Wolsey, speaking to his Lord Chamberlain and Comptroller one day, showed him that it seemed to them there should be some noblemen and strangers, Henry VIII, and his courtiers massed, arrived at his bridge, as ambassadors from some foreign prince. With that, quoth the cardinal, I shall desire you, because ye can speak French, to take the pains to go down into the hall to encounter, and to receive them, according to their estates, and to conduct them into this chamber, Cavendish, Pit. 51. Then spake my Lord Chamberlain unto them in French, declaring my Lord Cardinal's mind. Pit. 53. The general 21 opinion of our gentry as to the study of letters, before and about 1500 A.D., is probably well represented by the opinion of one of them stated by Pace, in his prefatory letter to Collet, prefixed to the former's De Fructa 22. It remains that I now explain to you what moves me to compile and publish a treatise with this title. When, 2 years ago, more or less, I had returned to my native land from the city of Rome, I was present at a certain feast, a stranger to many, where, when enough had been drunk, one or other of the guests, no fool, as one might infer from his words and countenance, began to talk of educating his children well, and, First of all, he thought that he must search out a good teacher for them, and that they should at any rate attend school. There happened to be present one of those whom we call gentlemen, generosos, and who always carry some horn hanging at their backs, as though they would hunt during dinner. He, hearing letters praised, roused with sudden anger, burst out furiously with these words. "Why you talk nonsense, friend?" he said. "A curse on those stupid letters. All learned men are beggars. Even Erasmus, the most learned of all, is a beggar, as I hear. And in a certain letter of his calls town nu capofar alphatomicron nu pypsilon nu alpha nu, that is execrable poverty, his wife, and vehemently complains that he cannot shake her off his shoulders right into beta alpha theta upsilon kappa epsilon alpha pi nu tau omicron nu, that is into the deep sea. I swear by God's body, I'd rather that my son should hang than study letters. For it becomes the sons of gentlemen to blow the horn nicely, opta, to hunt skillfully, and elegantly carry and train a hawk. But the study of letters should be left to the sons of rustics." At this point, I could not restrain myself from answering something to this most talkative man in defense of good letters. "You do not seem to me, good man," I said, "to think rightly. For if any foreigner were to come to the king, such as the ambassadors, orators of princes are, and an answer had to be given to him, your son, if he were educated as you wish, could only blow his horn, and the learned sons of rustics would be called to answer, and would be far preferred to your hunter or fowler's son. And they, enjoying their learned liberty, would say to your face, we prefer to be learned, and, thanks to our learning, no fools, then boast of our fool-like nobility. Then he upon this, looking round, said, Who is this person that is talking like this? I don't know the fellow. And when someone whispered in his ear who I was, he muttered something or other in a low voice to himself, and finding a fool to listen to him, he then caught hold of a cup of wine. And when he could get nothing to answer, he began to drink, and changed the conversation to other things. And thus I was freed from the disputing of this mad fellow, which I was dreadfully afraid would have lasted a long time, not by Apollo, like Horace was from his babbler, but by Bacchus. On the general subject, it should be noted that Fleta mentions nothing about boarders or apprentices in his account of household economy, nor does the Liber Contractulatoris Garderobi mention any young nobleman as part of the king's household. That among tradesmen in later times, putting out their children in other houses and apprenticeships were the rule, we know from many statements and allusions in our literature, and the Italian relation of England, temp. Hen. 7. Mentions that the Duke of Suffolk was boarded out to a rich old widow, who persuaded him to marry her. 27. It also says, the want of affection in the English is strongly manifested towards their children. For after having kept them at home till they arrive at the age of 7 or 9 years at the utmost, they put them out, both males and females, to hard service in the houses of other people, binding them generally for another 7 or 9 years. And these are called apprentices, and during that time they perform all the most menial offices, and few are born who are exempted from this fate. For everyone, however rich he may be, sends away his children into the houses of others, whilst he, in return, receives those of strangers into his own. And on inquiring their reason for this severity, they answered that they did it in order that their children might learn better manners. But I, for my part, believe that they do it because they like to enjoy all their comforts themselves, and that they are better served by strangers than they would be by their own children. Besides which, the English being great epicures, and very avaricious by nature, indulge in the most delicate fare themselves, and give their household the coarsest bread, and beer, and cold meat baked on Sunday for the week, which, however, they allow them in great abundance. That if they had their own children at home, they would be obliged to give them the same food they made use of for themselves. That if the English sent their children away from home to learn virtue and good manners, and took them back again when their apprenticeship was over, they might, perhaps, be excused, but they never return, for the girls are settled by their patrons, and the boys make the best marriages they can, and, assisted by their patrons, not by their fathers, they also open a house and strive diligently by this means to make some fortune for themselves, whence it proceeds that, having no hope of their paternal inheritance, that all become so greedy of gain that they feel no shame in asking, almost for the love of God, for the smallest sums of money. And to this it may be attributed that there is no injury that can be committed against the lower orders of the English that may not be atoned for by money. A Relation of the Island of England, Camden Society, 1847, pp. 24-6. This evidently refers to tradesmen. 23. The note by the editor 24, however, says it was the case with the children of the first nobility, and gives the terms for the Duke of Buckingham's children with Mrs. Hextall. The document only shows that Mrs. Hextall boarded them by contract during the time of absence of my lord and my lady. The Earl of Essex says in a letter to Lord Burleigh, 1576, printed in Murden's State Papers, p. 301-2, nevertheless, upon the assured confidence that your love to me shall descend to my children, and that your lordship will declare yourself a friend to me, both alive and dead, I have willed Mr. Waterhouse to shew unto you how you may with honor and equity do good to my son Hereford, and how to bind him with perpetual friendship to you and your house. And to the end I wold have his love towards those which are descended from you spring up and increase with his years. I have wished his education to be in your household, though the same had not been allotted to your lordship as master of the wards, and that the whole time which he should spend in England in his minority might be dead in attendance upon my Lord Chamberlain and you, to the end that as he might frame himself to the example of my Lord of Sussex in all the actions of his life, tending either to the wars or to the institution of a nobleman, so that he might also reverence your lordship for your wisdom and gravity, and lay up your counsels and advises in the treasury of his heart. That girls, as well as boys, were sent out to noblemen's houses for their education, is evident from Margaret Paston's letter of the 3rd of April, 1469, to Sir John Potton. Also I would ye should purvey for your sister, Marjorie, to be with my Lady of Oxford, or with my Lady of Bedford, or in some other worshipful place, whereas ye think best, and I will help to her finding, for we be either of us weary of other. Alice Crane's letter in the Potton Letters v. I. p. 35 ed. 1840 also supports this view, as does Sir John Heveningham's to Margaret Potton, asking her to take his cousin Annie's Loveday for some time as a boarder till a mistress could be found for her. If that it please you to have her with you to into the time that a mistress may be purveyed for her, I pray you thereof, and I shall content you for her board that ye shall be well pleased. Similarly in Bullen and her sister were sent to Margaret of Savoy and of Charles V, who lived at Brussels, to learn courtesy and see. Says Prof. Brewer. Sir Roger Twisden says that, and was not above 7 years of age, anno 1514, when she went abroad. He adds, it should seem me by some that she served 3 in France successively. Mary of England married to Louis XII, and 1514, with whom she went out of England, but Louis dying the 1st of January following, and that queen being to return home Sooner than either Sir Thomas Bullen or some other of her friends like she should, she was preferred to Claudia, daughter to Louis XII, and wife to Francis I. Then Queen. It is likely upon the commendation of Mary the Dowager, who not long after dying in 1524, not yet weary of France, she went to live with Marguerite, Duchess of Alençon and Berry, a lady much commended for her favor towards good letters, but never enough for the Protestant religion then in the infancy. From her, if I am not deceived, she first learnt the grounds of the Protestant religion, so that England may seem to owe some part of her happiness derived from that lady. Twisden's notes quoted by Singer in his of Cavendish's Life of Wolsey, 1825-57, as Henry VIII fell in love with his wife's maid of honor, began to kindle the brand of amours at the light of in Bullen's beauty, her excellent gesture and behavior. So we find in later times rich young men became enamored of poor young women staying in the same house with them. Mr. Bruce sends me an instance. The young lady was niece, you will perceive, to a well-beneficed clergyman, and a thriving gentleman well advanced in the public service. She had lost her mother, and her father was in debt and difficulties. She was therefore placed by the influence of her uncles in a well-known family in Wiltshire. State papers. Dom. Car. I. Vol. Cli. No. 29. Dr. Matthew Nicholas, afterwards Dean of St. Paul's, to Edward Nicholas, Clerk of the Council, and afterwards Secretary of State. Dated, West Dean, April 4th, 1637. I have spoken with Miss Evelyn since I wrote lost unto you, and inquired of her the cause ch moved her to displace my cousin Hunton. She told me much according to what she had said unto my cousin Hunton, with this addition, that she had respect in it as well unto her good as her own convenience, for howinge no new employment for her but her needle. She found that sittinge still at her work made her sickly, and therefore thought she might do better in another service where she might howe the ordering of an huswifely charge. For wich, she told me, she had made her very able. I expressed myself tender of the disgrace wich would lay up in my cousin and bange displaced in such a manner by warning Gajuan, whereof whatsoever were the cause, it would be imagined by all that now it not, to be in her ill carriage, and wish she had done me that favour as to how acquainted me with her intents in such time as I might how taken some cost to how disposed of her before it had been known that she was to low her. She slubbered at wich a slight excuse that she had acquainted my wife. But for my satisfaction she told me that she would be as mindful of her when God should call her as if she would with her. And in testimony of her good liking of her seru she would all owe her 40 shillings yearly toward her maintenance as long as herself should live. I am so well acquainted with what she hath as yet disposed to her by will, and so little value 40 shillings to my cousin Hunton's credit, as I gow her new thanks. Mr. Downs, I hear, is sent for home by his father with an intent to keep him with him. But I do imagine that when my cousin Hunton shall be otherwhere disposed of, he shall return. For my conceit is strong that the fear of his bange match to his disadvantage, who was placed with Mr. Evelyn a youth to be bred for his preferment, hath caused this alteration. Howsoever there be new words made of it, I confess that when I have been told of the goodwill that was observed between my cousin Hunton and Mr. Downs, I did put it by with my cousin Hunton's protestation to the contrary, and was willinger by that neglect to have suffered it to have come to pass, if it might have been, because I thought it would how been to her advantage. But know that the busins is come to this issue. As whatsoever BP re-tended I am confident this is the cause of my cousin's partinga. I begin to question my discretion. Good brother, let me how your advise what to do. 2. home and private education. Of these, more or less must have been going on all over England, by private tutors at home, or in the houses of the latter. In 5 years, after my baptism, I was handed over by my father to Syward, a noble priest, to be trained in letters, to whose mastery I was subdued during 5 years learning the first rudiments. But in the 11th year of my age I was given up by my own father for the love of God, and destined to enter the service of the eternal King. Orderic, Vol. 2. P. 301, ed. Prevost. From Adam de Morisco's Letters, 53, we find that Henry and Almeric, the eldest and youngest sons of the Earl of Montfort, were put under Grosseteste for tuition, he being then a bishop. At Paris, John of Salisbury, who died in 1180, gained a living by teaching the sons of noblemen, instruendo seceprum. Took them into Baud, Metallurgicus, lib. 11, c. 10. Henry of Huntingdon says, Richard, the king's, Henry I.S., bastard son, was honorably brought up, festive nutritus, by our Bishop Robert, Bloat of Lincoln, and duly reverenced by me and others in the same household I lived in. Anglia Sacra, Vol. 2. P. 696. Giraldus Cambrensis speaks of beating his coetanei at Conscolaris Terrisue, of being reproved for idleness by his uncle, the Bishop of St. David's, and of being constantly chaffed by 2 of his uncle's chaplains, who used to decline Juris and Stultus to him. Also he alludes to the rod. Probably there was some sort of school at either Pembroke or St. David 24a. De rebus suggestis, lib. 1, c. 2. 25. The statutes of a guild of young scholars formed to burn lights in honor of some saint or other, and to help one another in sickness, old age, and to burial, will be printed for us by Mr. Toulmin Smith in the Early English Text Society's books this year. Under this head of private tuition we may class the houses of abbots, where boys of good birth were educated. In his History of English Poetry, section 36, Vol. 3, p. 9, ed. 1840, Wharton says, it appears to have been customary for the governors of the most considerable convents, especially those that were honored with the mitre, to receive into their own private lodgings the sons of the principal families of the neighborhood for education. About the year 1450, Thomas Bromeel, abbot of the mitred monastery of Hyde near Winchester, entertained in his own abbatial house within that monastery 8 young gentlemen, or Gentiles pueri, who were placed there for the purpose of literary instruction and constantly dined at the abbot's table. I will not scruple to give the original words, which are more particular and expressive of the obscure record which preserves this curious anecdote of monastic life. Pro octo gentilibus pueris apud dominum abbadam studii causap perhinenanibus, et ad mensam domini victitanibus, cum Garcianibus sui ipsos comitanibus, hoc anno 17L 9s, capiendo pro 26. This, by the way, was more extraordinary, as William of Wykeham's celebrated seminary was so near, and this seems to have been an established practice of the abbot of Glastonbury, whose apartment in the abbey was a kind of well-disciplined court, where the sons of noblemen and young gentlemen were wont to be sent for virtuous education, who returned thence home excellently accomplished. 27. Richard Whiting, the last abbot of Glastonbury, who was cruelly executed by the king, during the course of his government educated near 300 ingenuous youths, who constituted a part of his family, beside many others whom he liberally supported at the universities. 28. Whitgift, the most excellent and learned Archbishop of Canterbury in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, was educated under Robert Whitgift, his uncle, abbot of the Augustine Monastery of Black Canons at Wellhaven, Lincolnshire. Says Strype, had several other young gentlemen under his care for education. Strype's Whitgift v. I. Chip. 3. of Lydgate, about 1420 to 30 A.D. I suppose Prof. Morley says in his English Writers, Vol. 2. Point. I. P. 423. After studying at Oxford, Paris, and Padua, and after mastering with special delight the writings of such poets as Dante, Boccaccio, and Alain Chartier, Lydgate opened at his monastery of Bury St. Edmund a school of rhetoric, in which he taught young nobles literature and the art of versifying. Now, the learning of music too demands its place, especially for me whom it distinguished when a boy amongst boys. For Thomas Langton, Bishop of Winchester, the predecessor of him who is now living, whose secretary I was, when he had marked that I was making a proficiency in music far beyond my age, as himself, perchance from his too great affection for me, would point out and repeatedly say, "The talent of this lad," he said, "is born for greater things," and a few days afterwards he sent me to pursue the study of literature into Italy, to the school at Padua, which then was at its greatest prime, and benevolently supplied the annual expenses, as he showed wonderful favor to all men of letters, and in his day played the part of the second Maecenas, while remembering, as he ofttimes said, that he had been advanced to the episcopal dignity on account of his learning. For he had gained, with the highest commendation, the distinctions of each law 29, as they say nowadays. Also he so highly prized the study of humanity 30 that he had boys and youths instructed in it at a school in his house. And he was vastly delighted to hear the scholars repeat to him at night the lessons given them by the teacher during the day. In this competition he who had borne himself notably went away with a present of something suitable to his character, and with commendation expressed in the most refined language. For that excellent governor had ever in his mouth the maxim that merit grows with praise. 31. Palsgrave in 1530 speaks of Maester Petrus Valensis, schoolmaster to Charles, Duke of Suffolk's excellent young son, the Earl of Lincoln, was received at a very youthful age into the family of Sir Anthony Wingfield, who furnished money for his education, and placed Roger, together with his own sons, under a tutor whose name was Bond. The boy had by nature a taste for books, and showed his good taste by reading English in preference to Latin, with wonderful eagerness. This was the more remarkable from the fact that Latin was still the language of literature, and it is not likely that the few English books written at that time were all largely spread abroad in places far away from the universities and cathedral towns. In or about the year 1530, Mr. Bond, the domestic tutor, resigned the charge of young Roger, who was now about 15 years old, and by the advice and pecuniary aid of his kind patron Sir Anthony, he was enabled to enter St. John's College, Cambridge, at that time the most famous seminary of learning in all England. He took his bachelor's degree in 1531, February. 18, in the 18th year of his age, being a boy, new bachelor of art, he says himself, a time of life at which it is now more common to enter the university than to take a degree, but which, according to the modes of education then in use, was not thought premature. On the 23rd of March following, he was elected Fellow of the College. Giles's Life of Ascom, Works Vol. p. 11 to 14. Dr. Clement and his wife were brought up in Sir T. More's house. Clement was taken from St. Paul's School, London, appointed tutor to More's children, and afterwards to his daughter Margaret, p. 402 call. 1. What a young nobleman learnt in Henry VIII's time may be gathered from the following extracts, partly given by Mr. Froude, History p. 39-40. From the letters of young Gregory Cromwell's tutor to his father, the Earl of Essex, the King's chief secretary. And so the evening deepens, and we turn now to the butler in the wine cellar. The order of his stew die, as the hours limited for the French tongue, ritinga, plange hiti weapons, castinga of accompts, pastimes of instruments, and such others, hath been devised and directed by the prudent wisdom of Mr. Southwell, who with a fatherly zeal and amity much desirings to have him a son worthy such parents, ceaseth not Oswell concerning all other things for him meet and necessary, as also in learninge, to express his tendre love and affection towards him, searchinge by all means possible how he may most profit, dili hurringa to read somewhat in Thenglish tongue, and advertising him of the naturel and true kinda of pronunciation thereof, expounding also and declaring the etymology and native signification of such words as we have borrowed of the Latines or French menu, not even so commonly used in our quotidian speech. Mr. Cheney and Mr. Charles and likewise endeavoureth and employeth themselves, accompanying Mr. Gregory in learninge, among whom there is a perpetual contention, strife, and conflict, and in manner of an honest envy who shall do best, not only in the French tongue, wherein Mr. Valence, after a wondrously compendious, facile, prompt, and ready way, not without painful diligence and laborious industry doth instruct them, but also in writinge, plange at weapons, and all other thire exercises, so that if continuance in this behalf may take place, whereas the last Diana, this shall, I trust, be consecrated to Apollo and the Muses, to thire no small perfect, in your good contentation and pleasure. And thus I beseech the Lord to have you, in his most gracious tuition, at Riesinga in North Oak, the last day of April, your faithful and most bounden servant, to his right honorable Maester Mr. Thomas Cromwell, Chief Secretary, into the King's Majesty. But for cause summer was spent in the service of the wild gods, it is so most to be regarded after what fashion ye'th is educate and brought up, in which time that is learned, for the most part, will not all wholly be forgotten in the older years. I think it my duty to ascertain yo our maestership how he spendeth his time, and first, after he hath heard mass, he taketh a lecture of a dialogue of Erasmus Colloquium, called Pietas Puerilis, wherein is described a very picture of one that shall be virtuosely brought up. And for cause it is so necessary for him, I do not one like cause him to read it over, but also to practice the precepts of the same, and I have also translated it into English, so that he may confer thime both togethers, whereof, as learned men affirm, cometh no small perfect 32. After that, he exerciseth his hand in writing 1 or 2 hours, and readeth upon Fabian's Chronicle as lunch. The residue of the day he doth spend upon the lute and virginals. When he writeth, as he doth very oft, I tell him by the way some history of the Romanes or the Greeks, which I cause him to rehearse again in a tale. For his recreation he useth to hawk and hunt, and showed in his long bow, which frometh and succeedeth so well with him that he seemeth to be thereunto given by nature. Of the course of study of well-bred youths in the early years of Elizabeth's reign, we have an interesting account by Sir Nicholas Bacon, Lord Keeper, father of the great Bacon, in a paper by Mr. J. Payne Collier in the Archaeologia, Vol. 36, Part 2, 339, Article 31. 33. Before he became Lord Keeper, Sir Nicholas Bacon had been attorney of that court, the Court of Wards and Liveries, a most lucrative appointment, and on the May 27th, 1561, he addressed a letter to Sir William Cecil, then recently, January 1561, made Master of the Wards, followed by a paper thus entitled, Articles devised for the bringing up in virtue and learning of the Queen's Majesty's wards, being heirs males, and whose landis, descending in possession and coming to the Queen's Majesty, shall amount to the clear yearly value of C. marks or above. Sir Nicholas asks the new Master of Wards to reform what he justly calls most preposterous abuses in the department. That the proceeding hath been preposterous appeareth by this, that chief thinge and most of price in wardship is the ward's mind, the next to that his bodie, the last and meanest his land. Now, hitherto the chief care of governance hath been to the land, being the meanest, and to the bodie, being the better, very small, but to the mind, being the best, none at all, which methinks is plainly to set the cart before the horse. P. 343. Mr. Collier then summarizes Bacon's articles for the bringing up of the wards thus. The wards are to attend divine service at 6 in the morning. Nothing is said about breakfast. 34. But they are to study Latin until 11, to dine between 11 and 12, to study with the music master from 12 till 2. From 2 to 3 they are to be with the French master, and from 3 to 5 with the Latin and Greek masters. At 5 they are to go to evening prayers. Then they are to sup, to be allowed honest pastimes till 8. And, last of all, before they go to bed at 9, they are again to apply themselves to music under the instruction of the master. At and after the age of 16, they were to attend lectures upon temporal and civil law, as well as the Disciplina Militari. It is not necessary to insert farther details, but what I have stated will serve to show how well-bred youths of that period were usually brought up, and how disgracefully the duty of education as regards wards was neglected. It may appear singular that in these articles drawn up by Sir Nicholas, so much stress is laid upon instruction in Music 35, but it only serves to confirm the notion that the science was then most industriously cultivated by nearly every class of society. Pace in 1517 requires that every one should study it, but should join with it some other study, as astrology or astronomy. He says also that the greatest part of the art had perished by men's negligence, for all that our musicians do nowadays is almost trivial if compared with what the old ones, Antica, did, so that now hardly one or two, unis ut alter, can be found who know what harmony is, though the word is always on their tongue. De fructu p. 54-5. Ascom, while lamenting in 1545, Toxophilus 29, that the laudable custom of England to teach children their plain song and prick song is so decayed throughout all the realm as it is, denounces the great practice of instrumental music by older students, the minstrelsy of lutes, pipes, harps, and all other that standeth by such nice fine minikin fingering, such as the most part of scholars whom I know use, if they use any, is far more fit, for the womanishness of it, to dwell in the court among ladies, than for any great thing in it which should help good and sad study, to abide in the university among scholars. By 1577 our rich people, according to Harrison, attended properly to the education of their children. After speaking of our women, whose bow tie common lie exceedeth the fairest of those of the main, he says, this nevertheless ifterly mislike in the poorer sort of them, for the wealthier do sildom offend herein, that being of themselves without competent wit, they are so careless in the education of their children, wherein their husbands also are to be blamed, by means whereof very many of them, neither fearing God, neither regarding either manners or obedience, do oftentimes come to confusion, which, if any correction or discipline had been vised toward them in youth, might ha prud good members of their commonwealth and country, by their good ceruse and industry. Desk of Britain, Holinshed I. 115 call. 2. This is borne out by Ascom, who says that young men up to 17 were well looked after, but after that age were turned loose to get into all the mischief they liked. Indeed, from 7 to 17, young gentlemen common lie be careful lie enough brought up. But from 17 to 7 and 20, the most dangerous time of all a man's life, and most slippery to stay well in, they have common lie the reign of all licenses in their own hand, and special lie sock as do live in the court. And that which is most to be marvelled at, common lie the wisest, and also best men be found the fondest fathers in this behalf. And if some good father wold seek some remedy herein, yet the mother, if the household of Our Lady, had rather, and will too, have her son cunning and bold, in making him to live trim lie when he is young, than by learning and travel to be able to serve his prince and his country, both wise lie in peace, and stout lie in war, when he is old. The fault is in yourselves, ye noble men's sons, and therefore ye deserve the greater blame, that common lie the meaner men's children come to be the wisest counselors and greatest doers in the weighty affairs of this real me. Schoolmaster Ed. Mayor P. 39 to 40. Note lastly, on this subject of private tuition, that Mulcaster in his Elementary, 1582, complains greatly of rich people aping the custom of princes and having private tutors for their boys, and withdrawing them from public schools where the spirit of emulation against other boys would make them work. The course he recommends is that rich people should send their sons, with their tutors, to the public schools, and so get the advantage of both kinds of tuition. Girls' home education. The earliest notice of an English governess that any friend is found for me is in the 34th letter of Osbert de Clare in Stephen's reign, A.D. 1135 to 54. He mentions what seems to be a governess of his children, quidem matrona quae liberos aegis, sc. Melitus Herberti de Furcies, educare consueverat. She appears to be treated as one of the family, e.g. they wait for her when she goes into a chapel to pray. I think a nurse would have been in silla quae liberos aegis nutriendos separat. Walter de Biblesworth was the tutor of the Lady Dionysia de Montcensi, a Kentish heiress, the daughter of William de Montcensi, Baron of Swainscombe, and related, apparently 35a, to the Valences, Earls of Pembroke, and wrote his French grammar, or rather vocabulary 36, for her. She married Hugh de Vere, the second son of Robert, 5th Earl of Oxford. Right. Lady Jane Grey was taught by a tutor at home, as we have seen. Palsgrave was tutor to Henry VIII. This most dear and most entirely beloved sister, Queen Mary, Didier of France, and no doubt wrote his L'Esclaircissement de la langue Françoise mainly for her, though also desirous to do some humble service unto the nobility of this victorious real me, and universally unto all other estates of this my native country. Giles du Guez, or as Palsgrave says to Henry VIII, the singular clerk, Maester Giles Dews, sometime instructor to your noble grace in this self-tongue, at the especial instance and request of divers of your high estates and noble men, hath also for his party written in this matter. His book is entitled An Introductory for to learn to read, to pronounce, and to speak French truly, compiled for the right high, excellent, and most virtuous lady the Lady Mary of England, daughter to our most gracious sovereign Lord Kawinji Henry VIII. 3. English University education. In early days Cambridge and Oxford must be looked on, I suppose, as mainly the great schools for boys, and the generality of scholars as poor men's children, 37 like Chaucer's, poor scholares ta that dwelten in the solar halley of Canterbury, his clerk of Oxenford, and those students, gifts to whom are considered as one of the regular burdens on the husbandman, in God speed the plough. Mr. Froude says, Hist, of England, 37. The universities were well filled by the sons of yeomen chiefly. The cost of supporting them in the colleges was little, and wealthy men took a pride in helping forward any boys of promise. 38a. Latimer Sermons, p. 64. It seems clear also, as the Reformation drew nearer, while the clergy were sinking lower and lower, a marked change for the better became perceptible in a portion, at least, of the laity. But Grosseteste mentions a noble scholar at Oxford, Epist. 129, and Edward the Black Prince and Henry V are said to have been students of Queen's College, Oxford. Wolsey himself was a college tutor at Oxford, and had among his pupils the sons of the Marquis of Dorset, who afterwards gave him his first preferment, the living of Leamington Chapel. The legend runs that the first school at Oxford was founded by King Alfred 39, and that Oxford was a place of study in the time of Edward the Confessor, 1041 to 66. If one may quote a book now considered to be a monkish forgery and an exploded authority, Ingulphus, who was abbot of Croyland, in the Isle of Ely, under William the Conqueror, says of himself that he was educated first at Westminster, and then passed to Oxford, where he made proficiency in such books of Aristotle as were then accessible to students, 40, and in the first two books of Tully's Rhetoric. Malden, on the Origin of Universities, 1835, 71. In 1201 Oxford is called a university, and said to have contained 3,000 scholars. In 1253 its first college, university, is founded. In 1244, Hen. 3. Granted its first privileges as a corporate body, and confirms and extends them in 1245. In his reign, Wood says the number of scholars amounted to 30,000, a number no doubt greatly exaggerated. In the reign of Stephen, we know that Vicarius, a Lombard by birth, who had studied the civil law at Bologna, came into England and formed a school of law at Oxford 41. He remained in England in the reign of Henry II. On account of the difficulty and expense of obtaining copies of the original books of the Roman law, and the poverty of his English scholars, Vicarius, 1149 AD, compiled an abridgment of the Digests and Codex, in which their most essential parts were preserved with some difference of arrangement, and illustrated from other law books. It bore on its title that it was Pauperibus Priest Certum Destinatus, and hence the Oxford students of law obtained the name of Pauperus. Malden, 72-3. Roger Bacon, who died 1248-41a, speaks of a young fellow who came to him, age 15, not having wherewithal to live, or finding proper masters, because he was obliged to serve those who gave him necessaries. During 2 years found no one to teach him a word in the things he learned. Opus Tertium Cap. XX. In 1214, the commonalty of Oxford agreed to pay 52s yearly for the use of poor scholars, and to give 100 of them a meal of bread, ale, and pottage, with one large dish of flesh or fish, every St. Nicholas Day. Woodson, I. 185, Wood's Annals, ed. Gutch v. I. P. 619-20, also notes that in 1461 A.D., divers scholars were forced to get a license under the chancellor's hand and seal, according to the stat. 12 Rick. 2 A.D. 1388 I.B. P. 519 to beg, and Surthas. More says, then may we yet, like poor scholars of Oxford, go a-begging with our bags and wallets, and sing Salve Regina at rich men's doors. On this point, we may also compare the statutes of Walter de Merton for his college at Oxford, A.D. 1274, ed. Halliwell, 1843, p. 19. Hoc etiam in idem domo specialiter observari volo et discerno. Ut circa eos, ca ad hugismodi elemosini participationem admitteni furent, diligenti solicitadine caveator. Inica praeter castos, honestos, pacificos, humiles, indigents, ad studium habils ac professor volenis, admittenter. Ad coram agnitionem singulis, cum indicta societate furent admittendi, sustentationis gratia in idem. Ad annum unum ut pot probationis causap primitus conceditor. Ut sic demum si indictus conditionibus laudabiliter esse habuerent. Indictum congregationem admittenter. Lodgings were let according to the joint valuation of 2 magistri, scholars, and 2 townsmen. Probi et legals homines de villa. Would I? 255 and 15 hen. 3. A.D. 1230 to 1. In the beginning of the 15th century, it had become the established rule that every scholar must be a member of some college or hall. The scholars who attended the public lectures of the university, without entering themselves at any college or hall, were called chamber deacons, as in Paris they were called martinets, and frequent enactments were made against them. Malden, p. 85 ref. To Wood's Annals, 1408, -13, -22, and 1512, and c. The following are the dates of the foundations of the different colleges at Oxford, as given in the university calendar. The Padon letters do not give us much information about studies or life at Oxford, but they do give us material for estimating the cost of a student there, too. 124.43. They show us the tutor reporting to a mother her son's progress in learning, too. 130. And note the custom of a man, when made bachelor, giving a feast. I was made bachelor. On Friday was Essenite, June 18th, 1479, and I made my feast on the Monday after, June 21st. I was promised venison against my feast, of my Lady Harcourt, and of another person too, but I was deceived of both. But my guests held them pleased with such meat as they had, blessed be God. The letter as to the costs is dated May 19th, 1478. I marvel, sir, that you sent me no word of the letter which I sent to you by Master William Brown at Easter. I sent you word that time that I should send you mine expenses particularly. But as at this time the bearer hereof had a letter suddenly that he should come home, and therefore I could have no leisure to send them to you on that wise. And therefore I shall write to you in this letter the whole sum of my expenses since I was with you till Easter last past, and also the receipts, reckoning the 20 shillings that I had of you to Oxon wards, with the bishop's finding, and that equals what cometh over my receipts and my expenses I have borrowed of Master Edmund, and it draweth too. And yet I reckon none expenses since Easter. But as for them, they be not great. E.W.M. Padon had expended £6 5s, 5 3/4 D, from the time he left his mother to Easter last, which this year fell on the March 22nd, from which time it was now 2 months, and of the expenses since incurred, he says, they be not great. We may, therefore, conclude the former account was from the Michaelmas preceding, and a moderate one. If so, we may fairly estimate his university education at £100 a year of our present money. I mean that £12 10s, 11.5 D, would then procure as many necessaries and comforts as £100 will at this day. What was the basis of Finn's calculation, he does not say. In 1468, the estimates for the Duke of Clarence's household expenses give these prices, among others. This sum would make the things named nearly 14 times as dear now, as in 1468, and raise Finn's 100 pounds to about 180 pounds. But no reliance can be placed on this estimate because we know nothing of the condition of the beves, muttons, velus, and porkies, then as contrasted with ours. Possibly they were half the size and half the weight. Still, I have referred the question to Professor Thorold Rogers, author of the History of Prices 1250 to 1400 AD, and he says, in the year to which you refer, 1478, bread was very dear, 50% above the average. But on the whole, wheat prices in the 15th century were lower than in the 14th. Finn's calculation, a little below the mark for wheat, is still less below it in most of the second necessaries of life. The multiple of wheat is about 9, that of meat at least 24, those of butter and cheese nearly as much, but that of clothing is not more than 6, that of linen from 4 to 5. Taking, however, one thing with another, 12 is a safe general multiplier. This would make the cost of young Paston's university education 150 pounds 11s, 60 a year. Mr. Whiston would raise Finn's estimate of 100 pounds to 200 pounds. He says that the rent of land in Kent in 1540 was a shilling or 18 pence an acre. See Valor Ecclesiasticus. And that the tithes and glebes of the dean and chapter of Rochester, which were worth about 480 pounds a year in 1542, are now worth 19,000 pounds. The remaining Oxford letter in the Podon volumes seems to allude to the students bearing part of the expenses of the degree or the feast at it of a person related to royal family. I supposed, when that I sent my letter to my brother John, that the Queen's brother should have proceeded at midsummer, and therefore I beseech her send me some money, for it will be some cost to me, but not much. The first school at Cambridge is said to have been founded by Edward the Elder, the son of Alfred, but on no good authority. In 1223, the term university was applied to the place. The dates of the foundations of its colleges, as given in its calendar, are Lord Henry Brandon, son of the Duke of Suffolk, died of the sweating sickness then prevalent in the university on the July 16th, 1551, while a student of Cambridge. His brother, Lord Charles Brandon, died on the same day. Their removal to Buckden was too late to save them. AEH. Can't I? 105, 541. Of them Ascombe says, 2 noble prime roses of nobility, the young Duke of Suffolk and Lord H. Matrevers were socked 2 examples to the court for learning, as our time may rather wish than look for a gain. Schoolmaster Ed. Mayor P. 62. Besides these 2 young noblemen, the first 104 pages of Cooper's Athene Cantabrigienses disclose only one other, Lord Derby's son, and the following names of sons of knights. 44. Thomas Rotherham, Fellow of Kings, son of Sir Thomas Rotherham, knight, and Alice's wife. Reginald Bray, High Steward of the University of Oxford, son of Sir Richard Bray, knight, and the Lady Joan, his second wife. Humphrey Fitzwilliam, of Pembroke Hall, Vice-Chancellor, appears to have been the son of Sir Richard Fitzwilliam of Ecclesfield, and Elizabeth his wife. Richard Redman, son of Sir Richard Redman and Elizabeth Aldberg his wife, made BP of St. Asaph. Thomas Savage, son of Sir John Savage, knight, BP of Rochester, was LL.D. educated at Cambridge. James Stanley, younger son of Thomas Earl of Derby, educated at both universities, graduated at Cambridge, and became prebendary of Holywell in 1485 BP, of Ely in 1506. Queen Elizabeth's favorite, Lord Essex, was at Trinity College, Cambridge. See his letter of May 13th from there in Ellis, Series 2. V. 3. p. 73. The furniture of his room and his expenses in the note p. 73-4. And his tutor's letter asking for new clothes for my lord, or else he shall not only be threadbare, but ragged. Arch. Wycliffe 45, when B.D. at Pembroke Hall, Cambridge, A.D. 1563, bestowed some of his time and abilities in the instruction of ingenious youth, sent to the college for education, in good learning and Christian manners. And among such his pupils were two noblemen's sons, viz. The Lord Herbert, son and heir to the Earl of Pembroke, and John, son and heir to the Lord North. Life by Strype, ed. 1822, vol. I. p. 14. While Whitgift was master of Trinity, Strype says he had bred up under him not only several bishops, but also the Earls of Worcester and Cumberland, the Lord Zook, the Lord Dunboy of Ireland, Sir Nicholas, and Sir Francis Bacon. To which I may add one more, namely, the son of Sir Nicholas White, Master of the Rolls in Ireland, who married a Devereux. Life I. 157, ed. 1822. A search through the whole of the first volume of Wood's Athenae Oxonienses, comprising a period of nearly 100 years, has resulted in the following meager list of men of noble or knightly birth who distinguish themselves. There are besides many men of genteel parents, some of trader ones, many friars, some Winchester men, but no Eton ones, educated at Oxford. Edmund Dudley, son of John Dudley, Esq., second son of John Lord Dudley, of Dudley Castle in Staffordshire. John Colet, the eldest son of Sir Henry Colet, twice Lord Mayor of London, was educated in grammaticals, partly in London or Westminster. Nicholas Vaux, son of Sir Will, Vaux of Harwoden in Northamptonshire, not the poet, Lord Vaux. John Borchia, Lord Berners, eldest son of Sir John Borchia, knight, Lord Berners of Hertfordshire, was instructed in several sorts of learning in the university in the latter end of K. Edidoing. 4. In whose reign and before were the sons of divers of the English nobility educated in academical literature in Balliol Call. 46. Wherein, as 'tis probable, this our author was instructed also. Thomas Wyatt, son of Henry Wyatt of Allington Castle in Kent, knight and baronet, migrated from St. John's, Cambridge. 47. Edward Seymour, son of Sir John Seymour, or St. Moore of Wolfhall and Wilts, knight, was educated in trivials and partly in quadrivials for some time in this university. He was Jane Seymour's brother, and afterwards Duke of Somerset, and was beheaded on Jan. 22. 1552-3. Henry Lord Stafford, author of the Mirror for Magistrates, the only son of Edward, Duke of Bucks, received his education in both the universities, especially in that of Cambridge, to which his father had been a benefactor. Anthony Brown, son of Sir Weston Brown, of Abbasroding and of Langenhoe in Essex, knight. Patrick Pluckett, Baron of Dunsery in Ireland, son of Rob. Pluckett, Baron of the same place. Peter Levins, or Levins, our manipulous or rhyming dictionary man, became a student in the university, and 1552 was elected probationer fellow of Mag. Call into a Yorkshire place, January 18th. 1557, being then Bach, of Arts, and on the January 19th, 1559, was admitted true and perpetual fellow. In 1560, he left his fellowship. ADH, Ox, P, 547, call. 2. Reinald Scott, a younger son of Sir John Scott of Scots Hall, near to Smeeth in Kent. Francis Tresham, of gunpowder plot notoriety, son of Sir Thomas Tresham, Knight. The number of friars and monks at the universities before the Reformation, and especially at Oxford, must have been large. Tanner says, and so the evening deepens, and we turn now to bread, salt, and the order of service. In our universities, we're taught divinity and canon law, then to hint 3, much in vogue, and the friars resorting thither in great numbers and applying themselves closely to their studies outdid the monks in all fashionable knowledge. But the monks quickly perceived it, and went also to the universities and studied hard, that they might not be run down by the friars. 49. And as the friars got houses in the universities, the monks also got colleges founded and endowed their 50 for the education of their novices, where they were for some years instructed in grammar, philosophy, and school divinity, and then returning home, improve their knowledge by their private studies, to the service of God and the credit of their respective societies. So that a little before the Reformation, the greatest part of the proceeders in divinity at Oxford were monks and regular canons. By Harrison's time, A.D. 1577-51, rich men's sons had not only pressed into the universities, but were scrooging poor men's sons out of the endowments meant only for the poor, learning the lessons that Mr. Whiston so well shows our cathedral dignitaries have carried out with the stipends of their choristers, boys and men. Les gros poissons mangent, les menus. Pro. Poor men are easily supplanted by the rich, the weak by the strong, the mean by the mighty. 52. Cot grave. Manger. The law of natural selection prevails. Who shall say nay in a Christian land professing the principles of the great inventor of philanthropy? Whitgift for one. See his Life of Stripe, B.K. I. Chap. 13. P. 148 to 50 ed. 1822. In 1589, an Act 31 Elise. C. 6 was passed to endeavor to prevent the abuse, but, like modern election bribery acts with their abuse, did not do it. At this present, of one sort and other, there are about 3,000 students nourished in them both, as by a late survey at manifestly appeared. The colleges at our universities, were created by their founders of the first, one life for poor men's sons, whose parents were not able to bring them up unto learning. But now they have the least benefit of them, by reason the rich do so incrock upon them. And so foray hath this inconvenience spread itself, that it is in my time and hard matter for a poor man's child to come by a fellowship, though he be noyers so good a scholar and worthy of that room. Such packing also is used at elections, that not he which best deserveth, but he that hath most friends, though he be the worst scholar, is always surest to speed, which will turn in the end to the overthrow of learning. That some gentlemen also, whose friends have been in times past benefactors to certain of those houses, do intrude into the disposition of their estates, without all respect of order or statutes devised by the founders, one lie thereby, to place whom they think good, and not without some hope of gain. The case is too evident, and their attempt would soon take place, if their superiors did not provide to bridle their endeavors. In some grammar schools likewise, which send scholars to these universities, it is lamentable to see what bribery is used. Bad example of rich men at college. For here the scholar can be preferred, such bribery is made, that poor men's children are commonly shut out, and the richer sort received, who in times past thought it dishonor to live, as it were, upon almas, and yet being placed, most of them die little other than histories, tables, dice, and trifles, as men that make not the living by their die the end of their purposes, which is a lamentable bearing. Besides this, being for the most part either gentlemen or rich men's sons, they oft bring the universities into much slander. 53 for standing upon their reputation and liberty, they ruffle and roist it out, exceeding in apparel, and hanting riotous company, which draweth them from their books into another trade. And for excuse, when they are charged with breach of all good order, think it sufficient to say that they be gentlemen, which grieveth mine not a little. But to proceed with the rest, every one of these colleges haw in like manner their professors or readers of the tongues and several sciences, as they call them, which diali trade up the youth their abiding privately in their hallies, to the end they may be able afterwards, when their turn cometh about, which is after 12 terms, to show themselves abroad, by going from thence into the common schools and pub-like disputations, as it were in aerium, there to tree their skills, and declare how they have profited since. They're coming thither. Moreover, in the pub-like schools of both the universities, there are found at the prince's charge, and that very large lie, 5 professors and readers, that is to say, of divinity, of the civil law, physic, the Hebrew, and the Greek tongues. And for the other lectures, as of philosophy, logike, rhetoric, and the quadrilles, although the latter, I mean arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy, and with them all skill and the perspectives are now smally regarded in either of them. The universities themselves do allow competent stipends to such as read the same, whereby they are sufficiently provided for, touching the maintenance of their estates, and no less encouraged to be diligent in their functions. On the introduction of the study of Greek into the universities, Drive S. Knight says in his Life of Colet, as for Oxford, its own history and antiquities sufficiently confess that nothing was known there but Latin, and that in the most depraved style of the schoolmen. Cornelius Vitellius, an Italian, was the first who taught Greek in that University 54, and from him the famous Grocyn learned the first elements thereof. In Cambridge, Erasmus was the first who taught the Greek grammar, and so very low was the state of learning in that university that, as he tells a friend, about the year 1485, the beginning of Hen. 7th reign, there was nothing taught in that public seminary besides Alexander's Parva Logicalia, as they called them, the old axioms of Aristotle, and the questions of John Scotus, till in process of time good letters were brought in, and some knowledge of the mathematics, as also Aristotle in a new dress, and some skill in the Greek tongue, and by degrees a multitude of authors, whose names before had not been heard of. 55. It is certain that even Erasmus himself did little understand Greek when he came first into England in 1497, 13 Hen. 7. And that our countryman Linacre taught it him, being just returned from Italy with great skill in that language, which Linacre and William Grocyn were the 2 only tutors that were able to teach it. Samuel Knight, Life of Dr. John Colet, pp. 17, 18. The age at which boys went up to the university seems to have varied greatly. When Oxford students were forbidden to play marbles, they could not have been very old, but in the mirror of the periods of man's life. 1430 A.D. In the Society's hymns to the Virgin and Christ of this year, we find the going up age put at 20. This is confirmed by young Paston's being at Eton at 19. See below, LVI. In 1612, Brinsley, Grammar School, 307, puts the age at 15 and says, such onely should be sent to the universities, who pro most ingenuous and towardly, and who, in a lieu of learning, will begin to take pains of themselves, having attained in some sort the former parts of learning, being good grammarians at least, able to understand, write, and speak Latine in good sort. such as ha good discretion how to gurn themselves there, and to moderate their expenses, which is seldom times before 15 years of age, which is also the youngest age admitted by the statutes of the university, as I take it. 4. Foreign university education. That some of our nobles sent their sons to be educated in the French universities, whence they sometimes imported foreign vices in England 57, is witnessed by some verses in a Latin poem in MS. Digby no. For Bodleian Library of the end of the 13th or beginning of the 14th century, printed by Mr. Thomas Wright in his Anecdota Literaria, p. 38. An English nation or set of students of the Faculty of Arts at Paris existed in 1169. After 1430 the name was changed to the German nation. Besides the students from the French provinces subject to the English as Poitou, Guienne, and C, included the English, Scottish, Irish, Poles, Germans, and Sick. Brit, John of Salisbury, born 1110, says that he was 12 years studying at Paris on his own account. Thomas à Becket, as a young man, studied at Paris. Giraldus Cambrensis, born 1147, went to Paris for education. So did Alexander Neckham, died 1227. Henry says, the English, in particular, were so numerous that they occupied several schools or colleges, and made so distinguished a figure by their genius and learning, as well as by their generous manner of living, that they attracted the notice of all strangers. This appears from the following verses, describing the behavior of a stranger on his first arrival in Paris, composed by Nigel Worker, an English student there, A.D. 1170. Montpellier was another university whither Englishmen resorted, and is to be remembered by us, if only for the memory of Andrew Board, M.D., some bits of whose quaintness are in the notes to Russell in the present volume. Later, the custom of sending young noblemen and gentlemen to Italy to travel, not to take a degree, was introduced, and Ascham's condemnation of it, when no tutor accompanied the youths, is too well known to need quoting. The Italian saying, Inglese Italianato e un diavolo incarnato, sums it up. 59. 5. Monastic and cathedral schools. Herbert Lusing, B.P., of Thetford, afterwards Norwich, between 1091 and 1119, in his 37th letter restores his schools at Thetford to Dean Bond, and directs that no other schools be open there. Tanner, not. Monp, XX, ed. Naismith, when mentioning the use and advantage of these religious houses, under which term are comprehended cathedral and collegiate churches, abbeys, priories, colleges, hospitals, preceptories, knights templars' houses, and frieries, says, secondly, they were schools of learning and education. For every convent had one person or more appointed for this purpose, and all the neighbors that desired it might have their children taught grammar and church music without any expense to them. 60. In the nunneries also young women were taught to work and to read English, and sometimes Latin also, so that not only the lower rank of people, who could not pay for their learning, but most of the noblemen and gentlemen's daughters were educated in those places. 61. As Lydgate, born at Lydgate in Suffolk, 6 or 7 miles from Newmarket, was ordained subdeacon in the Benedictine monastery of Berry Street, Edmonds, in 1389-62, he was probably sent as a boy to a monastic school. At any rate, as he sketches his early escapades, apple stealing, playing truant, and C. For us in his Testament 63, I shall quote the youth's bit of the poem here. Mal Malin. They could abuse a la VSC. To sherry stones to sacring. At these monastic schools, I suppose, were educated mainly the boys whom the monks hoped would become monks, cleric or secular. Mostly the poor, the plowman's brother who was to be the parson, not often the plowman himself. Once, though, made a scholar and monk there, and sent by the monastery to the university, the workman's, if not the plowman's, son might rule nobles and sit by kings, nay, beard them to their face. Thomas a Becket, himself the son of poor parents 63a, was sent to be brought up in the religious house of the canons of Merton. In 1392, the writer of Piers Plowman's Creed sketches the then state of things thus. Here I might stop the quotation, but I go on, for justice has never yet been done 66 to this noble creed and William's vision as pictures of the life of their times, chiefly from the profound ignorance of U.S. English of our own language, partly from the grace, the freshness, and the brilliance of Chaucer's easier and inimitable verse. There is one side of the picture, the workman's son turned monk and clerk to a lord. Let us turn to the other side, the plowman's son who didn't turn monk, whose head was shed in the straw, who delved and ditched, and dung the earth, eat bread of corn and bran, words fleshless, vegetables but no meat, drank water, and went miserably, Creed L. 1565 to 71. What education did he get? To whom could he be apprenticed? What was his chance in life? Let the statute book answer. Item, it is ordained and ascended, that he or she which used to labor at the plough and cart, or other labor or service of husbandry, till they be of the age of 12 years, that from thenceforth they shall abide at the same labor, without being put to any mystery or handicraft. And if any covenant or bond of apprentice, so be from henceforth made to the contrary, the same shall be holden for none. And whereas in the statutes made at Canterbury among other articles, it is contained that he or she that useth to labor at the plough or cart, or other labor or service of husbandry, till he be of the age of 12 years, that from the same time forth he shall abide at the same labor, without being put to any mystery or handicraft, and if any covenant or bond be made from that time forth to the contrary, it shall be holden for none, notwithstanding which article, and the good statutes afore, made through all parts of the realm, the infants born within the towns and seigneuries of upland, whose fathers and mothers have no land, nor rent, nor other living, but only their service or mystery, be put by their said fathers and mothers, and other their friends to serve, and bound apprentices, to divers crafts within the cities and boroughs of the said realm sometime at the age of 12 years, sometime within the said age, and that for the pride of clothing and other evil customs that servants do use in the same, so that there is so great scarcity of laborers and other servants of husbandry that the gentlemen and other people of the realm be greatly impoverished for the cause aforesaid. Our sovereign lord the king considering the said mischief, and willing thereupon to provide remedy, by the advice and assent of the lords spiritual and temporal, and at the request of the said commons, hath ordained and established, that no man nor woman, of what estate or condition they be, shall put their son or daughter, of whatsoever age he or she be, to serve as apprentice to no craft nor other labor within any city or borough in the realm, except he have land or rent to the value of 20 shillings by the year at the least, but they shall be put to other labors as their estates doth require, upon pain of 1 year's imprisonment, and to make fine and ransom at the king's will. And if any covenant be made of any such infant, of what estate that he be, to the contrary, it shall be holden for none, provided always that every man and woman, of what estate or condition that he be, shall be free to set their son or daughter to take learning at any manner school that pleaseth them within the realm. A most gracious saving clause truly, for those children who were used to labor at the plough and cart till they were 12 years old 67. Let's hope that some got the benefit of it. These acts I came across when hunting for the statutes referred to by the Boke of Courtesy as fixing the hire of horses for carriage at 4 pence apiece, and they caused me some surprise. They made me wonder less at the energy with which some people now are striving to erect barriers against democracy to prevent the return match for the old game coming off however improving and however justly retributive future legislation for the rich by the poor in the spirit of past legislation for the poor by the rich might be. It could hardly be considered pleasant, and is surely worth putting up the true barrier against, one of education in each poor man's mind. He who Americanizes us thus far will be the greatest benefactor England has had for some ages. These statutes also made me think how the old spirit still lingers in England, how a friend of my own was cured in a Surrey village where the kind-hearted squire would allow none of the R's but reading to be taught in his school, how another clergyman lately reported his farmers meeting on the school question. Reading and writing might be taught, but arithmetic not. The boys would be getting to know too much about wages, and that would be troublesome. How, lastly, our gangs of children, working on our eastern counties' farms, and our bird-keeping boys of the whole South, can almost match the children of the agricultural laborer of 1388. The early practice of the Freemasons and other crafts, refusing to let any member take a bondsman's son as an apprentice, was founded on the reasonable apprehension that his lord would, or might afterwards claim the lad, make him disclose the trade secrets, and carry on his art for the lord's benefit. The fourth of the 15 articulus or 15 pointus of the Freemasons, printed by Mr. Hallowell, p. 16, is on this subject. I should like to see the evidence of a lord's son having become a working mason, and dwelling 7 years with his master heist craft to learn. In the following section, the attribution of quotes is sometimes obscure. The text layout has been kept as close as possible to the original. Cathedral schools. About the pre-Reformation schools, I can find only the extract from Tanner given above. 42. On the post-Reformation schools, I refer readers to Mr. Whiston's Cathedral Trusts, 1850. He says, "The cathedrals of England are of two kinds, those of the old and those of the new foundation. Of the latter, Canterbury, the old archiepiscopal see, and Carlisle, Durham, Ely, Norwich, Rochester, and Worcester, old episcopal sees, were A.D. 1541 to 2 refounded, or rather reformed, by Henry VIII. Besides these, he created 5 other cathedral churches or colleges, in connection with the 5 new episcopal sees of Bristol, Chester, Gloucester, Oxford, and Peterborough. He further created the See of Westminster, which was, subsequently, A.D. 1560, converted to a deanery collegiate by Queen Elizabeth, p. 6, the preamble of the Act 31 Henry VIII. c. 9, for founding the new cathedrals, preserved in Henry's own handwriting, recites that they were established to the intent that God's ward myghd the better be set for the children brought up in learninge, clerks nourished in the universities, old Cervantes decayed, to have lifing, almshouses for poor folky to be sustained in, readers of Greece, Hebrew, and Latin to have good stipend, daily almas to be ministrate, mending of hyghd ways, an exhibition for ministers of the church. A general idea of the scope and nature of the cathedral establishments, as originally planned and settled by Henry VIII, may be formed from the first chapter of the Old Statutes of Canterbury, which is almost identical with the corresponding chapter of the statutes of all the other cathedrals of the new foundation. It is as follows. On 68, the entire number of those who have their sustentation, in the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of Canterbury,